Okay, really quickly, I'm going to talk about engine bay configuration as far as your vacuum lines and other miscellaneous things to help you guys get set up for tuning and just to make sure that the car is perfectly operational with as little problems as possible. Now, let me just zoom in here a little bit. First, I'm going to start with explaining the vacuum distribution block here. You want to get some sort of vacuum distribution that's easy so you don't have like T-fittings all over the place, and it'll just have your engine bay being a lot neater looking. Typically it's tapped off of the brake booster. You can see the brake booster would be like here. This isn't an exact representation of the appearance of what your brake booster would look like, but it is the same location. Um, there's generally a hose that comes off your brake booster and it hits a metal pipe that's against the firewall. You want to detach that hose and extend it to wherever you want to mount your vacuum block. And then, of course, the other side of that hose or the other side of that pipe would go down into the intake manifold somewhere down there that you can't even see. Well, basically, you run all of your accessories, you know, boost gauge, um, adjustable fuel pressure regulator, wastegate, blow-off valve, etc. off of that. So based on this particular design I got here, I have a manual boost controller running to the wastegate. This line, you can assume this line would be like for the FIC or whatever engine management you're using for boost reference. Um, This one would be for the blow-off valve, which, I got tucked down into here. And mind you, if you got a blow-through setup, you want to have it a minimum of 6 inches away from the MAP sensor, so you don't, have the car thinking that it has a vacuum leak, and then you have a poor idle and things like that. I recommend tile being the best blow-off valve to go with. It doesn't typically leak. Um, let's see what else, So yeah, a couple other lines here, like for the boost gauge, like I was saying, which would be in the car, and I have an adjustable fuel pressure regulator that also needs a vacuum source. So yeah, you can see how that's nice and localized to where you don't have a whole bunch of T fittings all over the place. So that's it for the vacuum setup. Typically, this hose would go into your intake pipe, but best practices for a turbo car would say use a catch can vented to atmosphere. That way you can evacuate as much crankcase pressure as possible. And as you can see here, I got like a stock air box to where it's capped off there, so the mass airflow center is on the charge pipe. Just my personal preference using the stock air box makes it so your intake air temperatures are as consistent as possible, and you're not sucking in all this warm air from the engine bay. And definitely make use of a turbo blanket. This particular setup here I had was more or less like a cold air intake when I actually had this car. So I had piping that literally came down into the fender from the box behind the fog light. Alright, so that explains that there. Switch gears. Now we're going to get a closer look at the motor itself. Behind the intake manifold, you got the PCV line going into the intake manifold. I recommend using a racing check valve because that will block boost pressure from hitting up against the PCV, which is right there. Now the reason why you want to prevent actual boost pressure hitting the PCV is because it's not designed to handle boost. This is a normally aspirated motor, and eventually that PCV will wear out and boost pressure will get past it and pressurize the head, thus resulting in increased crankcase pressure, and you can wear your motor out prematurely. So if you don't want to use this, what you can do is just change your PCV every single oil change, and you can you know, do a better job as far as not running into pressurizing your head over time. Right here would be a throttle, the vacuum line that comes off the throttle body. Sometimes people make the mistake of tapping off of that. You don't want to do that. You want to leave that vacuum line alone because it's meant to evacuate fuel vapors from the tank. So basically, fuel vapors come in through there and just get burnt in the intake system or through the combustion process. So you leave this vacuum line alone. Don't tap anything off of that. This port has a vacuum line just either going into the intake manifold or out to atmosphere, depending on what your vehicle is. The main purpose for this port basically is to keep the electronics cool inside of this throttle body. That's really it. These two ports right here, they are coolant passages. So basically you have one port that would go here and another port that would go here. And then these larger ports go to your heater core, in case you're wondering. Now let's talk about sensors. Typically, right here would be the factory oil pressure sensor. Typically, you guys would have a fitting here to where you would tap off of to add, you know, another pressure sensor in case you have an oil pressure gauge, which is definitely recommended. This right here is your water temperature sensor here. This little box right here is a mystery to everybody. It's actually a noise cancellator, and that's necessary because the way this engine was designed in this particular vehicle, along with the Camry, it generates a lot of electromagnetic interference that can ultimately cause misfires without it or prevent the car from running. So if you're doing any major engine work, don't forget to put this box back on the side of the head and plug it in. Over here is your cam position sensor. It's really easy to get to, so if you ever have a legitimate code where you have a cam position code, just change out that sensor. You can get it from AutoZone most of the time, lifetime warranty, 40 bucks. Now on this side of the motor, this is where your crank position sensor is. Same deal. If you ever have a legitimate P0335, all you got to do is just change that out. Now what can trigger this code for this type of sensor is if you misshift and over rev really hard, sometimes that'll happen. But that's the location of where it's at. Back here is your VVTi solenoid. Be careful not to break that if you're ever removing your engine. It's easy to break. And down under here, well, behind this mess right here. Oh man, I didn't put it in here. I don't think I did. Well, somewhere around here is the VVTi filter. It's hard to get to in the TC, but if you ever need to clean it, it's really easy to clean. It's got a metal screen in it. There's no real reason to have to buy a brand new one. And I think that's about it for now. If you guys got any more questions, feel free to comment, tag me, let me know. You guys know my inbox is always being blown up. But that's all I got for now. Bye-bye.